After spending some time diving really deep into retro gaming over these past few years, the topic of cancelled games has become something that consistently pulls at my heartstrings. It's shocking how many games were nearly, or in many cases, 100% complete, yet never saw a commercial release due to whatever reason, most likely financial. Could you imagine just how different things would be if someone had decided that Castlevania Symphony of the Night wasn't commercially viable for the gaming market in 1997, and the whole thing was scrapped? Would we even have an indie gaming market now? Thankfully, due to the discovery of prototypes and review copies over the years, many of these games are playable now in one form or another. There's one game in particular that, while recovered, still has a lot of unanswered questions surrounding it. The game in question is Time Diver Avenger, better known as Time Diver Eon Man for the NES. In the February 1993 issue of Nintendo Power, there was not only a review, but a full strategy guide for a game called Time Diver Eon Man by Taito. Considering that the Super NES had been released in North America in 1991, 93 would have been a very late release for an NES game, and apparently Taito also realized this at the last minute as the game was cancelled, despite supposedly being complete. Well, the good news is, the internet eventually got hold of it, so we can play Time Diver Eon Man in all its 11th hour 8-bit glory. It begins with a story sequence introducing the protagonist, a teenage boy who suddenly finds himself being chased by, and I quote, unidentified men. Thankfully, Time Diver from the future, yes, it says that on his birth certificate, also appears, saving him at the last minute and explaining that a group has traveled back in time to kill him before he can bear a son, who will go on to be a savior to humanity. Haven't I heard this somewhere before? Unfortunately, our would-be hero is injured, so you must don the Time Diver suit and travel through time to stop the evil organization. Let's get to the action. Time Diver is a side-view platformer without too many surprises. Your standard attack is the ultimate biomechanical phaser slice generated by the Time Diver suit's neutron splicer. Well, technically you have a punch slash, so pretty much. You also have a special weapon that's used by holding the up button while attacking. In the beginning, you only have an energy shot, but you receive a new weapon each time you beat a level, like a spin move that lets you pass through certain types of terrain, a watch that stops time, and a screen-clearing flash. Using special weapons will consume your power meter, but refill items are left behind by enemies frequently, so you probably won't feel compelled to conserve them. And finally, you can also bounce off walls by tapping the jump button again. Time Diver contains 5 stages that, unsurprisingly, take place in different time periods. You start out in the present day, but soon move on to post-apocalyptic future landscapes, and, of course, the Wild West. One thing that was unique to Time Diver for the time was that, other than the first and last stage, stage order was random. So you might go to the future and then go to the past, or go to the past and then go to the future. Taito really pulled out the big guns for this one. The stages do actually employ plenty of fun tricks to give variety to the gameplay. There are moving platforms, timed flame pillars, bullet trains that take up nearly the entire screen, and a whole gambit of obstacles in the final stage. There's also a stage with disappearing blocks that you have to navigate vertically. You'd think that a screen or two would be enough, but no, apparently the developers were really smitten with themselves over this little programming trick, and it will have you climbing like a window cleaner on the Empire State Building, requiring perfectly timed jumps all the way. Hope you don't miss one and fall all the way back down. The graphics are pretty good for an NES game. In 1993, they'd better be. It contains most of the landscapes we were accustomed to seeing in NES games. A modern city, underground pathways, some abstract version of the future, and the When you take a step back and look at it all, it's almost as if the time travel theme was just an excuse to use all these environment assets Taito was keeping as backup. They're all effective, without doing anything particularly new. The same goes for enemy sprites. Make a list of the most common enemies in 8-bit games, and they're pretty much all here. Men with jetpacks, ninjas, robots, zombies, okay, I'll admit that one caught me off guard, and men with big fists. The boss of the first level is a football player, theoretically an evil cybernetic one. Why? Because 90s. The music actually fits the game really well. The soundtrack is not going to compete with Mega Man 3, but the tracks are upbeat in a way that gets me in the mood for some 8-bit time-traveling big fists action. While I've said the game was going to be released by Taito, it was actually developed by Atlus, and the music was handled by the legendary Masuko Tsukasa. They certainly aren't his most complex songs, but I think they do a good job of portraying Time Diver's universe. Judged by the standards of other 8-bit platformers, Time Diver is a decent enough game, but there are two big problems. First of all, fists! Sorry. Okay, I swear that was the last one. The first problem is, the horizontal scrolling is extremely choppy, to the point where it almost burns my eyes. I wondered if maybe this had something to do with playing on the AVS, but the emulated playthroughs on YouTube look similar. We know the NES is capable of better than this. The bigger problem is, it's just way too easy. You have a long life bar, the hitbox for your attack is very wide, and life replenish items are dropped constantly. You're much more likely to stop playing due to getting tired of the disappearing block stage than to getting a game over. You can try to speedrun it or play without using special weapons to make it more of a challenge, but those are imaginary parameters imposed by the player. It's unfortunate, because Time Diver is genuinely fun to play with all the different platforming gimmicks and almost comical cast of enemies. It would have been much better if you had 3 life points and only 1 or 2 chances to recover life per stage. Still, Time Diver Eon Man has the magic of the 8-bit era wrapped up in it, and it's a worthy addition to the NES library. Too bad it was cancelled. So you're probably wondering why I'm holding what looks like a physical copy of it. This is where things get interesting. In 1994, a physical version of Time Diver Eon Man appeared in the Asian market with the title changed to Time Diver Avenger. Just to be clear, in this case, Asia means mainland Asia, so basically Taiwan and China. It doesn't include Japan. It had a box and cart but no instructions, and the cart was shaped to fit the Japanese Famicom, as pretty much all Asian NES games were. This version was sold by a company called Nitra Semiconductor, which we know next to nothing about. However, I was able to find a couple Chinese websites with information about Nitra Semiconductor, and even though I can't read Chinese, many of the characters are also used in Japanese, so I can piece some things together. We can see that the company was established on October 11, 1994, was located in Taipei, and supposedly closed operations at the end of May 1995. If this is true, it means they were active for only around half a year. We can even see the names of a couple people involved with the company, theoretically the president or CEO, but these I cannot read. When we talk about Chinese Famicom carts, we usually call them Famiclones or knockoffs because so many of them were just copies of pre-existing Famicom games sold with no respect for the copyright holder, effectively black market carts. So initially, you would assume Time Diver Avenger is just another pirated Famicom game with unusually fancy packaging. But there are some surprisingly strong arguments against this. First of all, Time Diver was scheduled for release in 1993, while the Nitra version was released in 1994, only 1 year later. In the case of cancelled games, we usually have to wait for years, often decades, before someone manages to dig up a prototype, and then we have to be lucky enough for that person to be willing to dump the ROM. To make a knockoff cart, you need at least one official cart, which doesn't exist, and as far as I can tell, Time Diver was never even intended to be released in Japan. The North American prototype cart was found and dumped much later. This has led people to speculate that Taito either sold the game program to Nitra to recoup some of the development cost, or possibly established a short-lived company on their own to distribute the game. This would make sense considering that even though the rest of the world had largely moved on to the Super Nintendo by 1993, the market for NES or Famicom games was still strong in Asia, probably because of how many clone consoles were floating around. Additionally, it turns out Nitra published at least one more Famicom game in Asia before their demise, and, you guessed it, it's another game by Taito, the Famicom version of Insector X, which they renamed to Queen Bee V. Or maybe it's Queen Bee 5. Who knows? I mean, there are a bunch of Chinese Famicom hacks with names like Mario 9 or Mario 14. But as far as I'm concerned, the biggest hint we have that Nitra actually owned the rights to Time Diver is on the packaging. For one thing, they made a box with original artwork and slapped their company logo on it. Now, it's not unthinkable that a company would do that with a pirated game, and Chinese hackers were utterly shameless when it came to Famicom knockoffs. But the title screen has also been altered to reflect the name change from Eon Man to Avenger, and shows the Nitra name and logo as well. That would be a pretty bold thing to do. The real kicker, however, is the text on the box. As I said, I can't read Chinese, but any literate Japanese adult would easily be able to piece together the meaning of the text at the bottom of the front side. It clearly says, "The copyrights and trademarks on this product belong to Nitra Semiconductor." Now, would a registered company really go to the trouble of putting something like that on a product they had stolen? Taking all of these factors together, the timing of the release, Nitra's dealing exclusively with Taito games, and the quality of the packaging, I think it's safe to believe that Time Diver Avenger isn't a knockoff, but a proper market release with the permission of the developer. In a way, Time Diver Eon Man wasn't cancelled, it was just sold in a market that we don't usually associate with official releases. It's not licensed by Nintendo, of course, but if it was sold with permission from the copyright holder, then as far as I'm aware, that's as official as anything. Yes, it's still all conjecture, and without talking to the people involved, we'll never know for sure. But if people are willing to believe the Big Bang Theory as cold hard fact, it's not a particularly big leap of faith. Besides, you can't argue with Big Fist!